Here's what nobody tells you about avoidants preparing to reconnect. They don't wake up one morning and suddenly decide to text you. There's no lightning bolt moment where everything becomes clear. Instead, what happens is a slow erosion of their defenses, like water gradually wearing down stone. And long before they ever type those words, long before they hit send on that message, their actions have already told the entire story. Most people wait for the actual text, the call, the DM. But by then, you've already missed weeks of signals that something was shifting beneath the surface. Because avoidants don't operate on impulse when it comes to reconnection. They operate on internal pressure that builds slowly until it becomes impossible to ignore. And that pressure, it shows up in predictable, observable patterns. The thing is, avoidants convince themselves they're fine with distance. They genuinely believe their own narrative that they're better off alone, that they don't need anyone. That solitude equals freedom. But their nervous system tells a different story. Their attachment system tells a different story. And eventually, those stories start leaking through their behavior in ways they can't fully control. Today we're breaking down the 8 specific behaviors that reveal an avoidant is working up to reaching out, even when they're still telling themselves they won't. Number 1. They start monitoring your world with surgical precision. Here's how it begins. You'll notice they're no longer casually aware of what you're doing. They've become a student of your life. They know your schedule without asking. They know when you post, when you're active, what you're interested in lately. It's not accidental anymore, it's deliberate research. An avoidant who's planning to reach out becomes obsessed with gathering information. What's changed in your life? Are you seeing someone? Are you happy? Are you still the person they remember? They're building a mental file, updating their understanding of who you are now, because they need to know what they're walking back into. This looks like them watching every single story you post, sometimes multiple times. It looks like them being online exactly when your activity suggests you might be online. It looks like them knowing details about your life that you never directly told them, because they've been paying attention to everything. Think of it like someone preparing for an important interview. They research the company thoroughly before they walk in the door. They study the culture, the recent developments, the key players. That's what an avoidant does with your life before attempting reconnection. They're gathering intelligence because the thought of reaching out blind without knowing what to expect is too terrifying. What you need to understand is this. Casual interest doesn't create patterns. Emotional investment creates patterns. When someone goes from sporadic awareness to methodical monitoring, something fundamental has shifted. They're no longer maintaining distance, they're closing it inch by inch, gathering courage through observation. Number 2, they engineer situations where you might naturally cross paths. Suddenly, they're interested in attending events they know you'll be at. They're asking mutual friends about gatherings with a casualness that doesn't quite land. They're positioning themselves in your orbit without making direct contact, creating opportunities for accidental encounters that are anything but accidental. Maybe they start showing up at the coffee shop you frequent, the gym you mentioned once, the neighborhood where you walk your dog. They're not stalking. They're creating plausibility. They want a reason to run into you that doesn't require them to admit they engineered it. This is different from coincidence, and deep down, you know it. Coincidence happens once, maybe twice. But when someone who previously had no reason to be in your physical or social spaces suddenly occupies them regularly, that's intentional proximity. They're building a bridge back to you, but they want it to feel natural, organic, like fate rather than choice. I worked with a woman named Jennifer whose ex started attending her weekly yoga class 3 months after their breakup. He'd never done yoga before. He lived across town. But suddenly, there he was, mat in hand, pretending this was a normal decision unrelated to her presence. 2 weeks later, after several, "Hey, funny seeing you here" exchanges, he asked if they could talk. The proximity wasn't random. It was preparation. He was acclimating you both to being in the same space again, testing whether his presence disturbed you, whether you'd be receptive to conversation. The engineered encounters were rehearsals for the actual reach out. When you notice someone repeatedly appearing in your world after an absence, understand what's happening. They're not ready for direct contact yet, but they're working up to it by normalizing their presence first. The accidental encounters are the foundation. The reach out is what they're building toward. Number 3, they suddenly become generous with social validation. After months of silence, radio silence, complete digital disconnection, they start liking your posts. Not all of them, not immediately, but strategically. A like here, a like there. Always just enough to remind you they exist, but not so much that it seems desperate or obvious. This is them testing the waters. They're wondering, will she notice? Will she care? Will she reciprocate? Each like is a tiny experiment in whether the door between you is still open, whether there's still possibility, whether you've completely moved on, or if there's space for them to re-enter. What makes this revealing is the timing and pattern. They're not engaging randomly. They're engaging with content that matters, posts where you look happy, posts about achievements, posts about your life moving forward. They're showing you, I see you, I'm still paying attention, I still care what happens to you. For avoidants, this kind of engagement requires internal negotiation. Every like is a small vulnerability because it admits continued interest. It says, I haven't forgotten you. It risks you noticing and either responding positively or ignoring them entirely, which would confirm their worst fear that they've been replaced or forgotten. But here's the crucial part. When an avoidant starts this pattern of strategic engagement, they've already made a decision internally. They've decided they want back in. They just haven't figured out how to verbalize it yet. So they communicate through actions first, through these small gestures that say, I'm still here, I still see you, I'm working up to something bigger. Pay attention to when the engagement starts and how it escalates. Usually, it begins with likes on neutral content, safe posts that don't require much courage. Then, it might progress to liking more personal posts, more vulnerable content. This escalation pattern tells you exactly where they are in their internal process of preparing to reach out. Number 4, they drop breadcrumbs through mutual connections. Suddenly, mutual friends are mentioning them in conversation more frequently. Oh, you know who I saw last week? They asked about you. Or, they mentioned you the other day, said they were wondering how you're doing. These aren't coincidences. These are strategically planted seeds. An avoidant planning to reach out often uses mutual friends as intermediaries, not to deliver messages directly, but to test the temperature. They want to know, does she ask about me? Does she seem interested? Does she seem over it? They're gathering reconnaissance through your social circle before making their move. This also serves another purpose. It puts them back in your mind. Even if you've been doing well, moving on, not thinking about them, suddenly they're being mentioned again. They're re-entering your consciousness through third parties, softening the ground for their eventual direct contact. I've seen this countless times. An ex who hasn't reached out in months suddenly becomes a topic of conversation among your friends. Not because your friends have organically started caring about this person again, but because this person has strategically ensured they're being discussed. They're creating presence without direct contact. What you're witnessing is fear management. Reaching out directly is terrifying for an avoidant because it requires admitting they were wrong about needing distance, wrong about being fine alone, wrong about not missing you. So they create indirect pathways first. They test whether you're receptive through intermediaries before risking direct rejection. When friends start casually mentioning your ex more frequently, especially if these mentions include they asked about you or they were wondering, understand that contact is likely imminent. They're building a narrative that reconnection would be natural, wanted, reciprocal. They're preparing both you and themselves for the conversation that's coming. Number 5. Their content becomes a mirror of your values. Remember how they never cared about environmental issues when you were together? Suddenly, they're posting about sustainability. Remember how they dismissed your love of art? Now they're sharing museum visits and thoughtful commentary on exhibitions. Remember how they were allergic to self-reflection? Now they're posting quotes about growth and change. This transformation isn't random personal development. This is strategic alignment. They're demonstrating that they've evolved into someone more compatible with you, someone who now understands and shares what matters to you. They're building evidence that things would be different this time. An avoidant preparing to reach out often becomes acutely aware of the gaps that existed between you, the incompatibilities, the reasons things ended, and they work to close those gaps visibly before attempting reconnection. They want you to see that they've changed, that they've learned, that your concerns have been heard and addressed. The thing is, some of this might be genuine. Distance and loss often do catalyze real growth, but the timing and the public nature of this growth reveal its purpose. If they were changing purely for themselves, it wouldn't require an audience. But they need you to witness this transformation because it's part of their case for reconnection. Think of it as rebuilding their personal brand before re-entering the market. They're addressing the product flaws, highlighting the improvements, demonstrating new features. When they finally reach out, they'll reference this growth, this alignment, this evolution as evidence that reconnection makes sense. What you need to discern is whether this change is sustainable or performative. Are they actually interested in these things, or are they performing interest to win you back? Time will tell, but for now, recognize that when an ex suddenly adopts your values and interests publicly, they're building a bridge back to you. The reach out is what they plan to walk across that bridge to deliver. Number 6, they start leaving comments. Instead of just likes, after establishing presence through likes, they escalate to comments. Nothing intense, nothing vulnerable, just safe, light engagement. Beautiful photo on your vacation post. Congratulations on your work achievement. Great recommendation on the restaurant you reviewed. These comments serve multiple functions. They're testing responsiveness. Do you reply? Do you engage back? Are you warm or cold? They're also normalizing conversation. After months of silence, jumping straight into "can we talk" feels jarring. But if you've been exchanging like comments for a few weeks, reaching out feels more natural. This is the avoidance version of warming up. They're re-establishing communication patterns gradually, building comfort on both sides. Each comment is a micro-interaction that says, "We can talk to each other. It's not weird, we're friendly." What makes this significant is the shift from passive observation to active engagement. Likes are anonymous enough, easy to dismiss, but comments require more courage because they demand your attention. They force acknowledgement. You can ignore a like, but a direct comment creates social pressure to respond. For an avoidant, each comment they leave is a calculated risk. They're exposing themselves incrementally, testing the waters 1 degree at a time. If you respond positively, if you engage back warmly, they'll escalate further. If you're cold or don't respond, they'll retreat temporarily but likely try again later. Watch for the pattern of escalation. Comments become more frequent, slightly more personal, slightly more substantial. "That looks amazing" becomes, "Remember you mentioned wanting to visit there" becomes, "I've been thinking about that conversation we had about travel." They're gradually reintroducing intimacy, building toward the moment when they can shift from public comments to private messages. Number 7. They experience something that makes your absence unbearable. A parent gets sick. They achieve something significant at work. They go through something difficult and realize the people around them don't really know them. Something happens that makes them acutely aware of who's missing from their life, and that person is you. Major life events shatter the illusion that avoidants are fine alone. In moments of real joy or real pain, we reach for our core people, the ones who actually know us. And if you were that person, if you understood them in ways others don't, these moments create unbearable clarity about the cost of their avoidance. This isn't manipulation. This is genuine recognition. Something happens that makes them realize, I want to share this with her. I need to share this with her. Nobody else will understand what this means the way she would. And that realization breaks through their defensive structure. You might not know about the event until they reach out to tell you, or you might hear through mutual friends. But either way, significant life events almost always trigger reach-outs from avoidants, because these moments override their usual protective mechanisms. I've watched this play out dozens of times. An avoidant can maintain distance successfully when life is steady, predictable, manageable. But introduce real emotion, real stakes, real vulnerability from external circumstances, and their defenses crumble. Suddenly, the person they've been avoiding becomes the person they need most. When an avoidant contacts you shortly after experiencing something major, understand that the event didn't create their feelings. It revealed them. You've been on their mind. The event just made denying it impossible. Number 8. Their silence becomes louder than noise. Here's the paradox. Sometimes the clearest sign an avoidant is planning to reach out is absolute radio silence. But the quality of that silence has changed. It feels heavy, loaded, intentional. It's not the silence of moving on. It's the silence of gathering courage. You can feel the difference, even if you can't articulate it. There's a presence in their absence, a weight, an electricity, like the stillness before a storm when everything goes quiet but you know something's coming. This silence often follows a period of increased activity, monitoring, engagement. They've been present, then suddenly they withdraw completely. This withdrawal isn't loss of interest, it's them making their final decision, having their final internal battle between fear and desire. During this silent period, they're rehearsing. What will I say? How will she respond? What if she's moved on? What if she rejects me? They're playing out every scenario, building their case, convincing themselves that reaching out is worth the risk. For you, this silence might feel confusing, especially if you've noticed all the other signs. They were so present, and now nothing. But understand this. The silence before reach out is different from the silence of genuine detachment. One feels empty, the other feels full. When an avoidant goes completely silent after showing signs of interest, they're likely in their final preparation phase. They've gathered information, tested the waters, built proximity, and now they're making peace with their vulnerability enough to actually reach out. Contact usually comes within days or weeks of this deep silence. It breaks suddenly, often with a message that's more vulnerable than you expected. I know this is out of nowhere, but I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. That silence was them wrestling with whether to say those words, and eventually the need to say them won. The truth about avoidance reaching out is this. By the time they actually contact you, they've been reaching out internally for weeks. Every behavior we've discussed is evidence of that internal reach out, the one happening in their mind and heart long before it happens through their phone. Understanding these signs doesn't mean you should wait around for someone who left. It doesn't mean you should interpret every small action as evidence they're coming back. But it does mean you can recognize when someone is genuinely working through their fear toward reconnection versus when they're just breadcrumbing or staying in your orbit with no real intention. The question isn't whether they're showing these signs. The question is, if they do reach out after all this internal preparation they've been doing, are you ready to respond? Have you been doing your own internal work? Because reconnection requires two people willing to show up differently than before. Their reach out will come when their fear of losing you permanently finally outweighs their fear of vulnerability. Your response should come from a place of clarity about whether what existed between you is worth rebuilding, whether their actions match their words, whether this time will actually be different. Pay attention to the patterns, trust what you observe, and make your decisions based on behavior, not potential.